My boss stole the football tickets I earned after a year of overtime, and told me I should be grateful just to have a job. I smiled and let him think he'd won. But on Monday, I started planning the quiet revenge that would end his career. They say loyalty at work eventually pays off. I believed that once. For 12 months, I lived in the office more than in my own apartment, late nights, empty takeout boxes, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. I poured myself into a client project that no one else even wanted to touch. I kept telling myself it would be worth it. Recognition, a promotion, maybe even just a thank you would have been enough. Instead, I got football tickets. They weren't just tickets, they were front row seats to the championship, gifted directly to me by the client himself. He pressed them into my hands, smiling. "For you," he said. "You carried this whole thing." My chest filled with pride, like someone had finally noticed the sacrifices, the sleepless nights. For once, I felt seen. But on Friday afternoon, just as I was finishing up my last report before the weekend, my boss walked into my cubicle with that smug, practiced smile he always wore when he was about to take something. He held the tickets between his fingers like they already belonged to him. "These were given to me," I said quietly, clutching my notebook so hard my knuckles turned white. He laughed. "Given to the company. You just happened to be the courier. You're lucky to even have a job, remember that." The words stung sharper than I expected. I wanted to scream, to fight, to grab those tickets and run. But instead, I took a slow breath and forced a smile. "Enjoy the game while you can," I said, pretending not to understand, pretending to be small. He smirked, pocketed the tickets, and walked away like he had won. That night, while he sat in the stadium under the bright lights, I sat alone in my apartment with takeout again, staring at the ceiling. My chest ached with humiliation, but beneath the shame, something else stirred, quiet and steady, like an ember refusing to die out. By Monday morning, I walked into the office with a different kind of silence in me. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence that comes right before a storm. And that was the day everything started to change. When I pushed open the glass doors that Monday morning, the office felt different. Or maybe it was me. I had carried myself through those doors countless times, weighed down by exhaustion and obligation. But that day, something inside me had shifted. My boss, Mr. Wallace, was already in his corner office, his voice booming through the glass as he bragged on the phone. I could hear pieces of his story drifting into the hallway, front row, unforgettable, client loved the work, and of course, I handled everything. I froze in place. He wasn't just stealing my tickets. He was stealing my story. I slipped into my cubicle, my hands trembling, and pulled open my email. Over the weekend, I had considered typing a message to HR, even to the client himself, but every draft ended the same: delete, delete, delete. Complaining would make me look petty, weak. And in this office, weakness was blood in the water. As I pretended to scroll through spreadsheets, I overheard my coworkers gathering by the coffee machine. They were whispering about the game, how amazing it had been. And then I heard my name. "She was supposed to go, right?" someone asked. Another voice, hesitant. "I thought so. But Wallace said he got the tickets directly from the client. He even joked about taking his daughter instead. Said she deserved it more than some assistant." Laughter followed. My face burned. Assistant? I wasn't an assistant, I was the project lead. But in their eyes, I had just been demoted by a single offhand remark. I sat there, staring at my monitor while my heart thudded in my chest. The cursor blinked on the screen like it was mocking me. At lunch, Wallace strutted through the office like a conquering hero. He carried a bag of overpriced stadium merchandise and tossed a cap onto one coworker's desk. "Got this for you," he said casually. People swarmed him, eager to hear his stories. And he told them, embellishing every detail, painting himself as the mastermind behind the project, the darling of the client, the man who had it all. Every word erased me a little more. But I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I simply smiled, nodded, and let him believe I was swallowing it whole. Because while he bragged, I was planning. I started small. That afternoon, I pulled up every email I had from the client. Every compliment, every acknowledgement of my work, every late-night thank you. I organized them neatly in a folder, labeled and dated. Then I opened our project files and carefully noted every place where my name appeared on reports, every revision with my initials, every login record that showed I was the one fixing problems at 2 a.m. while Wallace's account sat inactive. It wasn't anger driving me. It was something colder. Something patient. As I clicked through the files, I thought back to what I'd said to him, enjoy the game while you can. Maybe he thought that meant I'd stay quiet. Maybe he thought I was afraid. But he didn't know me at all. And he didn't see what was coming. By Tuesday, the office buzz around the game had died down, but my humiliation hadn't. If anything, it had settled deeper, like a bruise that refused to fade. Wallace walked past my cubicle with that swagger only he could pull off, shoulders back, chin high, phone glued to his ear. He gave me a little wink, as if we shared some inside joke. I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. That evening, after everyone had left, I stayed behind. It wasn't unusual for me, long hours had become my signature, but this time, I wasn't fixing reports or running numbers. I was building something else. A record. I went through 12 months of files, emails, project drafts, feedback forms, time logs. Every piece of evidence where my fingerprints were all over the work. Every note from the client that said, "Thanks for pulling us through," or "Couldn't have done this without you." By midnight, I had assembled a quiet archive that told the truth, the late nights, the solutions, the sacrifices. Not in angry words or accusations, but in black and white proof no one could argue with. And yet, I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. Timing, I realized, was everything. If I rushed, it would look like I was lashing out, bitter about tickets. But if I waited, if I let Wallace dig his own hole deeper, the fall would be spectacular. The next morning, Wallace called a team meeting. He strode into the conference room like a king addressing his court. "Our client is thrilled," he announced. "They want to extend the contract another year. And I'll be leading us through it again." His eyes landed on me briefly, a flicker of triumph passing through them. He knew I wouldn't challenge him here, not in front of everyone. I didn't. I nodded, smiled even, though my chest tightened with rage. But deep inside, I thought, keep talking. Keep claiming. Every word you speak makes my case stronger. After the meeting, one of my coworkers leaned over to me. "Must be nice, working under someone like him. He's always in the spotlight." I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. "Yeah," I said softly. "Spotlights can get awfully hot." The coworker laughed, not catching the meaning. But I did. And I knew then, Wallace had no idea that the stage he loved so much could so easily turn into his own trap. By the end of that week, Wallace's ego had grown unbearable. Every time the client called, he made sure to take the call on speaker, his voice booming through the office as if to remind us all who the real hero was. I watched quietly, jotting notes in my planner, pretending to focus on spreadsheets while my ears caught every word. He was rewriting history in real time, slipping my contributions into his own narrative. "I pushed through those late nights," he'd say. Or, "I caught that error before it went live." Each lie stacked higher, and no one questioned him. Why would they? He was the boss. But something shifted when Friday arrived. An email came in from the client. They wanted a full presentation of our results next month. The request was directed at me. My name, not his. I felt Wallace stiffen when he read it over my shoulder. "I'll handle this," he said quickly, plucking the email from my desk as though it were his property. My pulse raced, but I kept my expression calm. "Of course," I murmured. "You should definitely present." He smirked, satisfied with my submission, and started back to his office. What he didn't realize was that the client hadn't just asked for a presentation. They had asked for my insights. And unlike Wallace, I didn't deal in vague charm. I dealt in facts, details, receipts. That weekend, while Wallace probably basked in his borrowed glory, I sat at my kitchen table building the presentation. Slide by slide, I laid out the project story, not through opinion, but through evidence. Emails, timestamps, notes in my handwriting. I wasn't just preparing for a presentation. I was building a quiet weapon. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt something powerful stirring in me. Not anger. Not even revenge. Control. The following Monday, Wallace summoned me into his office. His blinds were drawn, the stadium cap from last week tossed carelessly on his desk. He gestured at the chair opposite him with a grin that made my stomach twist. "I've decided," he said, leaning back. "You'll make the slides, and I'll deliver the presentation. Best for the company image. You understand." I stared at him, my fingers tightening around the notebook in my lap. He didn't even bother pretending this time, he wanted the work, not the credit. "Of course," I said evenly. "I'll prepare everything you need." The satisfaction on his face was almost comical. He believed my compliance. He always did. That afternoon, I began the real work. Not for Wallace, but for myself. I built 2 decks. The first was the polished, simplified version Wallace expected, pretty graphs, broad strokes, the kind of performance piece he could swagger through without ever understanding the data. The second was my own. A meticulous, bulletproof breakdown that highlighted every single milestone. Each slide tied directly to an email, a late-night fix, or a client acknowledgement. My fingerprints were all over it. And just like the archive I'd already started, this version carried a truth that couldn't be erased. But the weapon wasn't ready to fire yet. Timing was still everything. That week, I watched Wallace rehearse with my first deck. He loved hearing himself talk, pacing the conference room like a showman. My coworkers clapped, nodding along, as if the brilliance belonged to him. I clapped too, smiling as though I admired him. Inside, I was calm. Detached. I almost pitied him, how blindly he basked in borrowed light, never noticing how flimsy the stage beneath him really was. One evening, as I packed my bag, he called after me. "Make sure those notes are flawless. This client's renewal means big things for me." For me. He didn't even bother saying us. I turned at the door, masking my expression with a polite nod. "Enjoy the spotlight, Mr. Wallace," I said softly. He chuckled, dismissing me with a wave. But in my mind, I added the words I didn't speak aloud, "while you still can." Because I knew the day was coming when the spotlight he loved so much would finally burn him. The day of the big presentation loomed closer, and the office pulsed with anticipation. Wallace was in his element, booming laughter, handshakes, late-night strategy sessions where he mostly sipped coffee and barked instructions while others did the real work. He thrived on the performance, and everyone played along. Everyone but me. I had become invisible to him, just the quiet shadow moving behind the curtain, arranging his props. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Late one evening, I stayed behind in the conference room after Wallace had left. The city lights shimmered outside the window, and the hum of the copier was my only company. I opened my laptop and pulled up the real presentation, the one he hadn't seen. Slide by slide, I refined the evidence. Screenshots of email threads, timestamps from the project portal, revisions logged under my name. Each page told the same story: I had carried this project. Not Wallace. Not anyone else. Me. But it wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about making sure the truth landed in the right hands. That night, I drafted a quiet email to the client's liaison, the same one who had handed me those tickets with a smile. I wrote politely, professionally. I prepared a detailed version of the presentation that might be helpful as reference. I'll send it to you in advance, so you'll have all the supporting details. I hovered over the send button, my heart thudding. This wasn't open rebellion. Not yet. But it was the first thread tugged from the costume Wallace wore so proudly. When I clicked send, a calm washed over me. The next morning, Wallace strutted into the office wearing a new suit, clearly purchased for the presentation. "This is it," he announced. "Our moment." He pointed at me. "Make sure the slides are ready by Friday. I don't want any surprises." "No surprises," I agreed, folding my hands calmly. All week, I watched him rehearse, spinning his performance around my simplified deck. He loved the rhythm of his own voice, the confidence of believing he was untouchable. My coworkers admired him, soaking in his charisma, never realizing how hollow it was. On Friday morning, the client team filed into the conference room. Wallace greeted them like old friends, shaking hands, cracking jokes. He gestured toward me. "My team member will run the slides while I walk you through the brilliance." I clicked open the deck, my face serene. But what Wallace didn't know was that the clients already had another version in their inbox, one that told a very different story. And as the first slide lit up on the screen, I caught the faintest smile tugging at the corner of the client's mouth. Something was about to shift. The presentation began like any other. Wallace's voice filled the room, smooth and commanding, the kind of tone he had perfected from years of taking credit for other people's work. He pointed at the charts I had designed, waved his hands dramatically at the numbers I had calculated, and basked in the nods of approval from the client team. But I wasn't watching him. I was watching them. Their expressions told me everything. They weren't just following along, they were comparing. Slide by slide, I saw them glance down at their printed packets, then back up at the screen. Their eyebrows arched, their lips tightened, some leaned back in their chairs with arms crossed. The air shifted. Subtly, but enough. When Wallace bragged about his late-night problem-solving, one of the clients tilted his head and tapped a finger against the page in front of him. When Wallace claimed credit for catching errors before launch, another client scribbled something in the margin, eyes flicking toward me briefly. My pulse raced, but I stayed still, clicking through the slides with steady hands. Halfway through, the client liaison, Michael, raised a hand. "That's interesting," he said, his tone polite but firm. "On this version of the report, I noticed the data shows someone else logged those fixes at 2 in the morning. Could you clarify that?" Wallace froze, just for a fraction of a second. His smile faltered. Then he laughed it off. "Oh, well, I oversee the whole team. Naturally, their hours are mine too." The clients exchanged looks. I kept my gaze fixed on the screen, but inside, a slow fire burned through me. This was it. The crack in his armor. The rest of the presentation stumbled forward. Wallace's voice grew tighter, his hands less steady. Every time he glossed over a detail, the clients pressed harder, specifics, numbers, receipts. All the things I had given them in the reference deck. By the end, Wallace was sweating through his brand new suit, his confident stride replaced by awkward shuffling. He wrapped up with a forced smile. "And that's why this renewal is such an exciting opportunity, with me at the helm." Silence. Then polite applause, sharp and thin. Michael turned to me. "Thank you for running the slides. Could you stay behind for a few minutes after?" Wallace's jaw tightened, but he nodded, trying to look in control. "Of course," he said, his voice clipped. As the clients filed out, my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel Wallace's glare burning into me, but I didn't flinch. Because I knew that the real meeting, the one that mattered, was about to begin. The conference room emptied, leaving only me, Wallace, and the client team's liaison, Michael. The hum of the projector filled the silence as the last slide lingered on the screen. Wallace cleared his throat, flashing a brittle smile. "Well, that went smoothly." Michael didn't return the smile. Instead, he looked directly at me. "Actually, before we wrap up, I'd like to ask a few questions." Privately. For a second, I thought Wallace might refuse. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around the back of a chair. But Michael's calm, steady tone left no room for argument. Of course, Wallace said finally, though the words scraped like sandpaper. He turned to me, his eyes sharp. Don't keep them waiting. Then he left, the door clicking shut behind him. The air in the room shifted instantly. Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. We received your version of the presentation. It was illuminating. He tapped the packet in front of him, the one filled with my receipts, my timestamps, my truth. I want to hear it from you directly. Did you lead this project? My throat tightened. For months, I had stayed silent, swallowing humiliation after humiliation. But now, with the question laid bare in front of me, the words came easily. Yes, I said softly. Every late night, every revision, every fix, it was me. Wallace supervised, but he wasn't there. He's been taking credit for my work since the beginning. Michael's expression didn't change much, but there was a flicker in his eyes, recognition, maybe even respect. He nodded slowly. That explains a lot. I exhaled, a weight lifting from my chest. Michael closed the packet and set it aside. We'll be reviewing this internally. But I want you to know, your effort hasn't gone unnoticed. Sometimes silence speaks volumes. And sometimes it needs a voice. When I left the room, my knees trembled, but my heart felt steady. Wallace was waiting outside, pacing like a caged animal. He snapped his head up when he saw me. What did you say? He demanded. I met his eyes, calm and unflinching. Only the truth. His face darkened, but before he could lash out, Michael stepped out behind me. Mr. Wallace, he said smoothly. We'll be in touch. Wallace forced a smile, but his eyes never left mine. And in that moment, I knew he understood, the spotlight he loved so much was slipping away. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Wallace shut himself in his office, blinds drawn, phone calls hushed. The swagger was gone. Even his footsteps down the hall sounded different, shorter, heavier, like each step carried the weight of doubt. I kept my routine steady. I came in on time, did my work, answered emails with a calm efficiency. I wanted no one to see the storm brewing under the surface. Revenge, I had learned, didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. On Wednesday, an email landed in my inbox from Michael. We'd like you to attend the follow-up meeting Friday. Your perspective will be valuable. I read it twice, my chest tightening with something between relief and fear. I knew what it meant, though the words were careful. The client wanted me there, not Wallace. I heard the slam of a door, then Wallace's voice echoing down the hall. Ridiculous. After everything I've done, his outburst cut off abruptly when he saw me watching from my cubicle. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. That Friday, the follow-up meeting began without his usual theatrics. The client team arrived, shaking hands politely, but their eyes sought me out. I sat at the far end of the table, quiet until Michael gestured toward me. Could you walk us through the details from your report? He asked. Wallace shifted in his chair, ready to cut in, but Michael raised a hand, silencing him. So I spoke. Slowly at first, then stronger. I explained the late-night fixes, the client requests I had handled directly, the times I'd kept the project from slipping through the cracks. Every word was grounded in proof, and every nod from the clients was another nail in Wallace's carefully built facade. By the end, the silence in the room was different. Heavy. Final. Thank you, Michael said. That's the kind of clarity we needed. Wallace forced a chuckle, but it fell flat. He tried to pivot, to spin it back in his favor, but the clients were no longer looking at him. Their attention was on me. And in that moment, I knew, his fall had begun. The following week, the news spread quietly but swiftly. The client had renewed the contract, on the condition that I would be the primary contact moving forward. The announcement came in an email copied to the entire office. My name, not Wallace's, stood bold in the client's words. We look forward to continuing our work directly with her. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. A year of overtime, of humiliation, of swallowing back my anger, and now, at last, recognition. Not loud. Not dramatic. But undeniable. Wallace stormed past my desk minutes later, his face red, lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. The office had already seen the email. They had already seen the shift. The man who once strutted under the spotlight now hid behind closed blinds. His voice no longer carried through the halls. And when I passed his office, I caught him staring at his desk with empty eyes, like a king staring at the ruins of his crown. I never confronted him. I didn't need to. Instead, I kept my head high, did my work, and built the next project with a steadiness he could never fake. My coworkers' whispers grew louder, respectful now, not mocking. And every so often, I'd catch a glance of admiration, the kind I had once longed for but never received. Quiet revenge, I realized, doesn't come from shouting or striking back. It comes from patience. From letting the truth rise when the lies collapse under their own weight. Wallace had stolen my tickets. But he could never steal what really mattered. As I packed up one evening, I thought of what I had told him weeks before: enjoy the game while you can. He had. And now the game was over.